Good evening, this is Brass Tax. I'm Zakir Jacob. A week after Justin Trudeau's allegations, External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar today spoke at the United Nations General Assembly. He did not name Canada or any other country for that matter, but he did say rather tersely and very directly that the whole concept of territorial integrity and sovereignty, which is sacrosanct as per the UN Charter, cannot be cherry-picked. You cannot use and throw it away as per your convenience. That you can't use your domestic political compulsions, whatever they may be, to try and back terror. So selectively, some groups that use violence or incitement to violence, they're okay because they're asking for territorial integrity of some other country to be compromised. And countries that you care about, if their territorial integrity is compromised, then that becomes a violation of the UN Charter. Now, separately, the Washington Post today reported how the police response after Nijjar's death in the middle of June was slow. There were turf wars between the Surrey Police and the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and the investigation so far has been rather ham-handed. So the question then is Canada trying to conveniently sort of pass the buck or blame India? And so far, like I said, it's been over a week since those public allegations. No proof has been delivered yet. So are they diverting attention because the probe by Canadian police has so far not resulted in anything substantial?
Without genuine solidarity, there can never be real trust.
All right, so I want to first bring you up to speed with what External Affairs Minister Jaishankar said in his UNGA speech. He did not name any country, he did not name Canada or China or Pakistan. He said politics must not dictate one's response to terror. In a sense, the Khalistanis, Nijjar included, were asking for violent means to get a separate state of Khalistan. That can't be seen as backed by a democracy. This was the most important part, perhaps the headline of his speech. You cannot cherry-pick respect for territorial integrity. When Russia attacks Ukraine, that was a violation of Ukraine's territorial integrity. The entire world was rightfully anguished by it. But when the Khalistanis are asking for a violation of India's territorial sovereignty by asking for a separate state, then the West are seemingly supportive of it, or at least some elements in Canada, for example, are supportive of it. That is a double standard. Non-interference in the internal matters of other countries must be respected. When Trudeau said that this was interference by India in Canadian affairs, the vice versa can also be true. You are backing those people who want to carve up an integral part of India and ask a separate state from that. Also, he said a rules-based order. Again, Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister, said that this was a violation of the rules-based order, that Indian agents were allegedly involved in the killing of a Canadian national on Canadian soil. But the rules-based order must apply equally to all. Are you defending the rules-based order for a person, in this case Nijjar, who is not exactly a law-abiding citizen? And then he also went on to say, Jaishankar, that without genuine solidarity, there cannot be real trust. Let me play out that important part of Jaishankar's speech where he talked about how you can't play footsie with territorial integrity. You cannot cherry-pick territorial integrity, that countries, all of them, have to respect the territorial integrity of others. And that means if a group is asking for a violently carving out a separate state from what is an integral part of India, that too is a violation of territorial integrity. Let's play out that soundbite and then I'll go across to the rest of our program.
The power of markets should not be utilized to steer food and energy from the needy to the wealthy. Nor must we countenance that political convenience determines responses to terrorism, extremism, and violence. Similarly, respect for territorial integrity and non-interference in internal affairs cannot be exercises in cherry picking. When reality departs from the rhetoric, we must have the courage to call it out. Without genuine solidarity, there can never be real trust. This is very much the sentiment of the Global South.
All right, now separately, the Washington Post today put out a detailed investigation into Nijjar's death. It examined a video of the moments leading up to his death and also the moments after his death. And the investigation into Nijjar's death, as per the Washington Post story, does raise some very serious questions. Number one, the police, the Surrey police, who were immediately alerted after bullets were pumped into Nijjar outside a Gurdwara in Surrey, the cops took 20 minutes to respond to the distress call, and that in a heavily patrolled area, and that the WAPO story notes is unusual. The fact that they took 20 minutes to get to the scene of the crime. Now, once they reached there was a turf war, a jurisdictional battle between the Surrey police, who are the local police, and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, who are the federal police. Each of them did not know whose jurisdiction this case came under. Both the Surrey police and the RCMP have refused to give any kind of updates on the probe up until today. Mind you, it's been over 3 months. Not one person has been named. Not one person has been charged yet. There are dozens of businesses, homes around that vicinity where this crime happened. None of them have been contacted by the cops. No interviews of those people have been taken. The cops have not asked for any CCTV footage in that area from these dozens of businesses and homes. In fact, it is rather bizarre. It's rather, telling that 3 months after this crime, a crime for which the Canadian Prime Minister publicly accused India of being involved in, the police there that's doing the investigation has not spoken to the businesses and homeowners there for either CCTV footage or recorded their interviews. And that, like I said, is telling. Also, eyewitnesses who claim that they saw the assailants fleeing, the assailants attacking Nijjar and then subsequently fleeing. There were 2 cars that have been identified in that report. None of those people have been interviewed either. So something is going on here. Why would such a high-profile case, like I said, a case for which the Prime Minister of a country stood up in Parliament and accused a foreign government of assassinating one of its nationals on its soil, why would the investigation 3 months on not tick off these basic boxes? I think that's a critical thing. But I want to start off this discussion. I want to open it up to our panelists, and I want to start it off with what Jaishankar said, the External Affairs Minister at the UNGA. Dilip Sinha is former Indian diplomat. Raymond Vickery, author and advisor on US-India relations. Wyatt Claypool is senior correspondent for the National Telegraph. Vivek Dahija is a strategic affairs expert. But I want to first go across to Peter MacKay, who is former Minister for National Defence and Minister for Foreign Affairs in the Conservative government under Stephen Harper. Thank you very much, Mr. MacKay. First things first, we're all still appalled by the manner in which, the very public manner in which the Prime Minister of Canada went up in Parliament and made these grave allegations. And it's been a week and we're still waiting to see what's the evidence to back those claims. And I just put out what the Washington Post today said, no interviews conducted with the eyewitnesses, no interviews of the homeowners or business owners around there for any kind of CCTV footage. Surely, for such a high-profile crime, what explains this rather ham-handed nature of the investigation?
Well, I wish I could answer that. It's completely bizarre, as you've said, and I think there are 2 tracks. There is the political track, and then there is the criminal investigation, but both seem to be sorely lacking in terms of answers and evidence. The Prime Minister's statement in Parliament that kicked off this explosive controversy, he speaks of credible allegations. Well, at a criminal standard, that doesn't meet even the most basic threshold of reasonable and probable grounds. And not to get into the legality, but this is an open murder investigation. And I have never seen anything like this in my career, both as a prosecutor, my time in Parliament, my time in government, where the head of state essentially fingers another country in such a broad and defamatory way without any evidence. Now, look, some evidence must exist. There must be some shared intelligence, either signal intelligence or or human intelligence that points to certain individuals, perhaps in government, but none of that should be, in my opinion, playing out in public. If they hope to apprehend those responsible, you need cooperation from the Indian government, and accusing them in such a blatant and public way doesn't lend itself or bring about the type of cooperation that you would want in an open murder investigation.
What, according to you, you've been Minister for Foreign Affairs before, you've been Minister for National Defense before. Like I said, when a Prime Minister makes such public allegations, I mean, these are not happening in back channel. What would be the threshold of evidence that you would want to see for him to have made that decision to go public? I mean, obviously it has to stand in a court of law, but it has to be more than that. It has to be beyond a reasonable doubt for the Prime Minister of a country to have gone public with those allegations. As a lawyer, as a qualified lawyer, what would the threshold of that evidence be, according to you?
Well, the threshold for a charge to be laid is reasonable and probable grounds. What you speak of would bring about a conviction, that is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. But look, at this point, we haven't even arrested a suspect. We haven't named a suspect. It isn't unusual, of course, for the police to go out and seek the assistance of the public. But very rarely, if ever, I think we're in uncharted, unprecedented waters when you see the politician, the head of the government in our country, stand up and make such, frankly, vague allegations. I have not seen or heard anything that lends itself to that step that the Prime Minister has taken. Nor would I expect to. That is the back channel information that often comes from allies in the Five Eyes. It might be shared intelligence, but it's all intended, of course, to get to the perpetrators of the crime. And making a broad allegation like this doesn't really bring about cooperation. In addition to that, we know that 2 weeks ago, our Prime Minister met with the Indian Prime Minister and made this allegation, which was refuted. The word was absurd. It's not true. And yet, just a short time later, he stands on the largest stage in our country and makes this allegation. It's beyond odd.
Okay. Let me now open this up to our other panelists as well. Dilip Sinha, as a former diplomat, what the External Affairs Minister said today, again, he didn't name Canada, he didn't name China or Pakistan or any other country for that matter, and he simply said, one of the governing principles since the UN Charter came into existence has been the concept of territorial integrity. But you cannot cherry pick territorial integrity, Dilip Sinha, because and I said this at the top of the show, when Russia attacked Ukraine, the entire world was appalled by it because it was an invasion of Ukraine's territorial integrity. Whereas when you have Khalistanis, who are basically, at least many of them, are advocating through violent means for a separate state to be carved out of the Indian state of Punjab, that's also a violation of territorial integrity. Dilip Sinha?
Well, yes. Well, in the case of Ukraine, I think we used political convenience because we did not condemn Russia because of the strong India-Russia relations. So there perhaps Jaishankar was on weak ground. But in the case of Canada, we are on extremely strong ground. And he mentioned this issue of non-interference in the internal affairs of countries. Now, what's happening in Canada is that Canada is giving shelter to people who blatantly interfere in India's internal affairs and claim it as a right. Now, this is what he was pointing out when he talked about interference in internal affairs. And there he was on extremely strong ground. And of course, the other point about people in Canada wanting to break up India in the name of trying to create a new state called Khalistan. Now, on both these counts, he was on extremely strong ground because Canada is guilty of both these issues.
Raymond Victory, the other thing which Jaishankar also referenced today, again, I'm saying this again and again, he didn't name Canada, but I think it's very apparent because of this controversy who he was talking about. One of the things that Justin Trudeau said in his speech was this is about a rule of law issue, that in democracies, you cannot have foreign governments come and assassinate, Canadian nationals on Canadian soil. Now, I would imagine that if the Prime Minister of a country is going out on a limb talking about rule of law, at least the person he's doing it for is a law-abiding citizen. Nijjar is hardly that. It's like the Prime Minister of Pakistan coming out and batting for Osama bin Laden after he was killed by the Navy SEAL, saying, "Oh, he was an innocent man, or he was a national of a different country killed on our soil." I mean, if you are really going out on a limb and making such public accusations, who are you doing it for? You're doing it for a person who has a Interpol Red Corner notice against it. Raymond Vickery, that was for you, sir. Yeah.
I can hear you barely. You're garbled.
Okay, I'm going to try and see if I can go to one of our other guests and come back to Raymond Vickery in just a moment once that audio is fixed. Wyatt Claypool, if you heard that question, you want to take that?
Well, yeah, I think that Canada would react far differently to the situation if we had experience with a separatist terrorist group basically taking root in India. If the FLQ, the separatist Quebec terrorist group, was holed up in India, planning attacks, training people, and then trying to send them back to Canada, we would obviously have a major problem with it. And it's absolutely correct to say that there's been a lot of cherry picking going on. We've been having CCP police stations on Canadian soil harassing Chinese diaspora who do not like Beijing because they do not like the CCP government. They are being harassed and intimidated and sometimes attacked. We had Karima Baloch, the Balochistani activist, getting drowned in Toronto, which was labeled a suicide. We didn't even investigate, even though it made no sense that she would drown herself at 2 a.m. in Toronto. And that there was a lot of, we have other cases, Iranian regime, anti-regime activists in Iran getting murdered in Canada. And we just don't do anything about it. But I think because Justin Trudeau wanted a political fight that he thought would maybe bolster his popularity, he ended up going off on a limb with this fight with India. And it's 100% true that, yeah, there could be evidence of an extrajudicial killing. We'd love to see it. But the problem is that you don't go off on a limb and make the accusation before you have the evidence. Right now, it's kind of embarrassing to Canada. Even if we hypothetically come up with the evidence, we're just going to seem like just a country that's hard to trust. That when Canada starts speaking, you have to wait a few weeks before you actually figure out what they're saying has any substance to it.
Okay. Can I go back to Peter MacKay before I go back to the others? On the point that Wyatt Claypool made, and I think it's a fair point, a lot of commentators have been talking about this in Canada as well. Before the last election, Justin Trudeau went all fire and brimstone against China and Chinese meddling in Canadian politics, interference in Canadian elections, etc. But ever since that whole Meng Wanzhou case, which was the daughter of the Huawei founder, and she was released in exchange for 2 Canadian nationals, he's been accused of going soft on China. A lot of Canadian commentators are asking if this whole brouhaha around Khalistan and making these public allegations against India is a convenient diversionary tactic from the accusation against Trudeau that he's gone soft on China.
Well, one would certainly hope not, given the stakes. And, at this point, 8 years as Prime Minister, one would hope that he has come to understand the importance of his role and everything that he says diplomatically. I wouldn't put this down to malice as much as I would to incompetence. We saw something happen yesterday in the House of Commons when the Ukrainian president was visiting, and we had a former Nazi participant, albeit a Ukrainian, who fought against the Russians in the gallery that was recognized. We cannot forget as well the serious incident of the Air India bombing that happened, that originated from Canada. And so one would hope the Prime Minister has a much firmer grasp of history, let alone reality, and not just trying to change the channel here. I still come back to the rule of law argument, which is certainly we cannot have foreign interference to the degree where an individual who does have certainly a spotty record, one would note, in terms of his immigration to Canada, but he does hold a Canadian passport. How that came about is still a bit of a question, but nevertheless, he is entitled to the protection of the rule of law, and the police should be investigating this fully. The political part of this is what does not make sense, and we are going to have in our country a sitting judge, examine the issue of foreign interference, and this has now expanded more broadly because it was almost solely focused on China. This is now obviously going to entail looking at the circumstances of what has happened here with the assassination of Mr. Nijjar. But was this an attempt to change the channel? I can't imagine that any sitting prime minister in a G7 country and in a Commonwealth country, a rule of law country, would sink to such depths. I hope that is not true.
Okay, so let me go to Raymond Vickery, and I want to go across to our wall here. I hope you can hear me fine, Mr. Vickery. Over the weekend, one of the things that came out was And this was the New York Times report, and David Cohen, who is the U.S. ambassador to Canada, alluded to this, that the initial intel on this came from the United States as part of the Five Eyes Alliance. Does that materially change anything? Because so far, all U.S. officials have spoken on record on this, whether it was Blinken or Jake Sullivan or even the White House spokesperson earlier this morning, was basically saying that, look, we want India to cooperate. Both our partnerships are strong. We care deeply for both countries. But at the end of the day, no U.S. official has come forth and said, oh, we condemn this, or we believe Mr. Trudeau's allegations, or that, India should not be doing this, should not be going around in foreign locations killing foreign nationals. They've taken a very, very safe and very conservative line on these allegations by Mr. Trudeau. Raymond Vickery.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I believe that the main point here is how can the U.S. and India work together to build peace and prosperity in the world. And that involves being able to fight terrorism from wherever it originates. That having been said, it is absolutely plain that there has to be a distinction between actions taken and words which are said. Evidently, this fellow was doing more than talking about a separate state in India. He was taking some action. And so therefore, there has to be something that will correct that situation. But it is not appropriate, in order to be able to do that, to simply enter the territory of someone else and kill them. It never has been that two wrongs make a right. Mm-hmm. And what the United States and India need to do is to work together to be able to fight terrorism, whether or not it's originating from Canada or Pakistan or wherever. And I believe that to be the case, but it also is incumbent upon India, who says that India has not been involved in this, that's absurd, not to turn around and say, well, if we did do it, it's all right because somebody else did it. That isn't the way to build an international system which meets the standards which India and the United States have set for it. And I hope that would not be the case here.
Okay, Vivek Tejia, and I want to go to the Washington Post investigation. For a person who had police protection, Nijjar had police protection before he was killed, why would the police take 20 minutes to reach the crime scene? And then there's jurisdictional issues. You'd imagine that it happens in third world countries, but the local police and the federal police were fighting over, whose jurisdiction this comes under. That again further delayed. And 3 months on, the fact that none of the surrounding, premises, whether it's residential or commercial, they've not been asked for CCTV footage. None of those folks have been interviewed. It's such a high-profile case. Doesn't the investigation 3 months on look a bit amateurish?
Well, again, I am a foreign policy expert, not an expert on police procedures in Canada. But so all I can say is it certainly sounds strange. It doesn't look like they've handled the investigation terribly well. Going on this reportage, again, I cannot speak to the truth of what was stated in the post.
Case for which the Prime Minister has gone public with these allegations. You'd imagine that it's a slightly more watertight case for him to have gone public with these allegations.
Now, that I can speak to, and I would really echo what has been said on this panel, that his way of handling this has been extremely problematic. If indeed he has credible evidence, or as he calls it, then that has to be handled diplomatically through allies, speaking to India through back channels, not shouted from the rooftops, because now that has thrown a huge spanner in the works. There's a tailspin now. India stopped visas. So what's next? So I think it's been handled very, very poorly. And really, unless he had a smoking gun, he would not have done this in Parliament. But yet, where is the smoking gun? All we have had are leaked reports in various media houses, presumably leaked by Canada, that there's human intel or signals intel, but we haven't seen it. So I find that really, really very bizarre.
What would again? I come back to what would the threshold of that smoking gun be? And let me ask Peter McKay this, because again, we've heard media reports. Vivek Dahija is right about there being a smoking gun, some kind of diplomatic chatter. Some officials, Indian officials who are based there in Canada, there's some conversations between them, so on and so forth. There's human intel and the signals intel on this. But to say that those guys ordered the hit, I mean, that is a stretch. I mean, the threshold of that evidence standing in a court of law has to be more than just what they call diplomatic chatter.
Well, that's absolutely right. You would need to have eyewitnesses. You would need to have individuals. And most importantly, you would need to have, in my opinion, a person who was arrested, the so-called trigger man, the person who committed the crime, then confessing and saying, I was paid to do this, or I was put up to this by officials in India. And clearly that's not what we have here. We don't have any arrests. We don't even have suspects. We have a finger pointing at an entire government, which to me, if you're relying on that government for cooperation to find the perpetrators, it's blown up spectacularly. And there is a cost to this diplomatically. We've both expelled diplomats from our country. There's visas that have been frozen. We have over 1 million people of Indian descent, Sikhs, Hindus, people from Punjab, people from other parts of all parts of India that are in Canada and want to be able to see their relatives and to visit. They want to be able to do business. So there is a massive knock-on effect that is now happening as a result of this one, statement that happened on the floor of the House of Commons in Parliament. So it's an entirely bizarre situation in terms of how it's unfolded. And I quite frankly cannot think that this has not interfered in the investigation to the point where we may never find the perpetrators. I'd be quite surprised if they are still in Canada.
So, Dilip Sinha, one of the things that Peter McKay just said about the knock-on effect this is having and potentially likely to have more on the Indian community there in Canada, over 1 million of them, not just Sikhs, but Hindus and Christians and, people from different parts of India who've immigrated there. Surely the government of India, yes, on the one hand, it is well within its right to take grave offense to what Justin Trudeau has said, but at the same time, the blowback of it, where does the government of India sort of walk that fine balance that the blowback of all of this does not go back to the Indian community there in Canada, and how do they ensure that if they can?
Well, that is quite true. The Indian community there is very large, and they will suffer any consequences of spoiled relations between India and Canada, and we can already see that happening in the case of Government of India stopping all visas for Canadian nationals. So that is inevitable. But let me come back to the points that you raised about Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and his allegation. Now, if you go back, you find that Justin Trudeau is quite adept at passing the responsibility of all his mistakes to others. 5 years ago, when he had come to India, he brought along with him a person called Jaspal Atwal, who was a murder convict, attempted murder convict in India. And when at that time the matter leaked out, then his NSA held a press conference and said that rogue elements in the Indian establishment may have been responsible for getting Jaspal Atwal into the delegation. Now, 2 years later, a Canadian journalist investigated the matter through Canadian records and found that Atwal had been added to the delegation by the Prime Minister's office in Canada. Now, here was a case of direct passing the buck. And this is precisely what he's done in the case of the Nazi gentleman who was there in Parliament as well. So it's quite common with him and quite usual for him.
I think that episode has been quite telling. And before I go back to Raymond Vickery and to Wyatt Claypool, Peter McKay, you want to weigh in on that? I mean, now we have, after that very, very embarrassing and some would say almost unpardonable stuff with the Nazi war veteran who was brought in and felicitated and people were applauding and all of that. Now, members of Mr. Trudeau's government, including the foreign minister, is conveniently saying that the speaker must resign. It's the speaker's office who invited him, and they're sort of passing the buck on to the speaker, perhaps even preparing the ground to make him a fall guy. But at the end of the day, the buck stops with the Prime Minister.
Well, clearly that's true. And in most cases, there would be consequences and accountability taken by individuals who had to be responsible for vetting who was going to be in the gallery on such an important historic occasion. So, yes, it's highly embarrassing. Look, as a Canadian, I'm mortified that that happened. I'm equally, deeply, deeply concerned by what is happening in terms of the relationship between Canada and India as a result of the handling of this matter. And it's a police matter. I come back to this being a rule of law issue around a murder case, an open murder investigation where there has now been political interference and wading in at the highest level in our country. It's highly inappropriate in my view. And yet I don't know how we get this back in the box short of finding the perpetrators, those who were responsible for the murder of Mr. Nijjar. And that is going to be extremely difficult now in the current circumstance. But I do want to assure you and your listeners that this is not the view of our country. We do not tolerate this type of violence. We should not countenance the open expression of violence by any individuals or groups. There are hate crimes in our country. There are criminal code offenses for certain behaviors that need to be applied. And this type of behavior, all the behavior here is reprehensible, that has resulted in a loss of life, but making accusations that cannot be backed up with evidence. And so I come down very much in these instances on the side of evidence. We need cold, hard facts before we go out and start pointing the finger at individuals. You cannot undo the reputational harm, as we're seeing in this instance.
But Wyatt Claypool, what may be the domestic political blowback for this? Because as some of the other panelists said, Trudeau just conveniently moves on to the next controversy. I mean, he has this way of sort of deflecting all the blowback from controversies that he himself creates onto something else. Do you see Wyatt Claypool? Do you see any kind of substantive domestic political cost for Trudeau to pay out of this entire controversy?
Are you asking me?
No, to Wyatt Claypool. Yeah.
I don't think this is going to result in as much of a shifting of the polls, but I think that this has been toxic inside the Indian community, because both the way that the Trudeau Liberals as well as a lot of the more liberal-friendly media has been framing this issue has been a Hindu party in India potentially killing a Sikh man in Canada, and they're framing it in purely sectarian ways. And that's why you have so many people coming out both from the Sikh community and the Hindu community saying that they don't feel safe in Canada right now. And I think it's because, one, the Canadian government's not taking extremism seriously, and two, they're also making it out that basically anyone from the Sikh or Hindu community could be in danger right now because they're not handling and they're not actually controlling the situation. They're just kind of letting chaos reign. I also think one of the very disgusting things that's happened throughout this entire case is the government, is both the Liberals and the NDPs acting as if Khalistanis, the people from the Khalistani movement, represent the Sikh community. It's one of those disgusting lies that's been going on for about 40 years now that really has to stop. It would be like trying to accuse Catholics of being affiliated with the IRA just simply because of their faith.
I want to go to Raymond Vickery there on the wall. One other question that certainly begets attention is this, and Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party in Canada have done this in the past as well. Their foreign policy to important countries in the world is shaped in many ways by domestic immigrant politics. So their policy to Russia was in many ways shaped by Ukrainian refugees and Ukrainian immigrants who came into Canada. Their politics towards China was shaped in many ways by Taiwanese and by Chinese immigrants into Canada. And now this whole thing is happening with vis-a-vis India and this whole Khalistan issue. Why would anyone jeopardize important diplomatic relationships at the altar of domestic immigrant politics?
Well, I think it's one of the challenges of democracy to be able to overcome this kind of dividing and pandering to different segments. And I don't think any democracy is free from that. But the strength of democracy is that in the longer run, there are consequences. Mr. Trudeau will face an election in the very near future. If all the polls are correct, and I'm an American and not a Canadian, and your Canadian guests know better than I, but it certainly appears that his political career is very much in jeopardy. And you can see from the what was said in Parliament by the opposition demanding facts as opposed to accusations. So I believe that if we can step back from this and handle it more in the way it should have been in the first place, and that is among democracies being able to work out problems that occur with security, that it can be put back on track, and there will be no conflation of Mr. Trudeau with Canada. We cannot be involved in democracies with a cult of personality that one person is in fact the nation. Mm-hmm. That went out with Louis XIV. But what we have to do as great democracies is work together to be able to resolve this. Now, that is not occurring, and unfortunately, what we're having is a tit-for-tat situation, which is not productive from the Indian side, from the Canadian side, much less that of the United States or any of the other great democracies that want to build peace and prosperity in the world.
I'll give Peter MacKay the final word. The question of domestic political blowback. Yes, there was a poll out over the weekend which seemed to suggest that the Conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre, is about 10 points ahead. And if elections were to be held today, he would be 10 points ahead of Justin Trudeau. But like I said, there's also this whole angle with the NDP and Jagmeet Singh, where Trudeau has made the political calculation that if he consolidates that vote for the Liberal coalition, the Liberal NDP coalition, then he's perhaps assured of a re-election, that the Conservatives on their own cannot beat this coalition simply numbers-wise, and he's played this rather cynical political game to consolidate that particular vote bank, the Sikh vote bank.
Well, that is certainly one interpretation of these events. I want to completely associate myself with my American colleague in saying that, the actions of one individual or even a group of individuals in this government are not indicative of the Canada-India relationship, which is strong and abiding and truly something that we cherish in our country. And so as far as the political fortunes of Mr. Trudeau and the Liberal Party, I think they are in real jeopardy, frankly. And I'm biased, of course, as a Conservative, but I do believe that this is costing him dearly in terms of credibility, not only outside the country, but domestically as well. I think this has blown back on him. There is also this tenuous relationship with Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the NDP, in which they have this formalized coalition. Now, that may help preserve their hold over Parliament in the short term, but I believe that when we have a Canadian election that could come within the next year, 18 months, that there is going to be a reckoning. And I think you are going to see an effort by Canadians to renew their democracy with a new government. And obviously my hope is it will be a Conservative government, and that we can get back to normalizing relations and working together collectively in the best interest of Indian and Canadian citizens.
All right, we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much to all our guests. Like I said, it's been over a week since Trudeau made those allegations in a very dramatic and public fashion. It's got to a point, I mean, journalistically speaking, the story has got to a point where we have this old phrase that something's got to give. And in this case, I guess, unless Trudeau is able to cough up solid evidence to back those claims, those very public and grave claims that he made in Parliament, unless he can cough up that evidence, I don't see the story moving forward in terms of any kind of diplomatic resolution or moving towards some kind of a finality. But let's move on to another story, and this is a domestic political story. It's a huge one. In a major political shift in Tamil Nadu, the AIADMK has snapped ties with the BJP. The AIADMK unanimously passed a resolution yesterday to end its alliance with the NDA. In the statement that was released, the party slammed the Tamil Nadu BJP president, Mr. Annamalai, for criticizing Dravidian stalwart Annadurai, former chief minister, and also the person after whom the AIADMK is named. In fact, the party's General Secretary, Edappadi Palaniswami, former Chief Minister, has said that they would lead an alliance with other like-minded smaller parties in the upcoming Lok Sabha elections. The BJP, of course, they are now suggesting, BJP sources suggesting, that one of the demands of the AIADMK was that Annamalai be removed as state BJP president, but the BJP High Command denied that request. Now, while the opposition has claimed that the move shows the NDA is crumbling, could this be a blessing in disguise for the BJP in a state where it is yet to make serious inroads?
It is BJP who needs AIADMK. It's not AIADMK needs BJP as far as Tamil Nadu is concerned. And history is going to repeat.
भारतीय जनता पार्टी ने गठबंधन दल जितने भी हमारे रहे, पहले भी और अब भी, उन सबको महत्व भी दिया, साथ भी दिया, एक परिवार के रूप में ही साथ में लेकर चले।
All right, I want to go across first to Kovai Satyan, spokesperson of the AIADMK. We'll also be joined in a moment by R. Rajagopalan, senior journalist, and Suman C. Raman, political analyst. But Kovai Satyan, you have been in alliance with the NDA since certainly the passing of former Chief Minister Madam Jayalalitha. Many in Tamil Nadu, say that the AIADMK, the current leadership, whether it is EPS or your rival faction OPS, has survived with overt and covert support from the BJP. Why are you now, 6 months before a Lok Sabha election, calling off this alliance?
Yeah, good evening, Jacob. There is something called a sanctity in ally. When you are in a war, you have to fight the enemy. You cannot swing the sword at your own ally. And yes, being an ally, the state unit can go to the people, talk about their ideologies, talk about their achievements, and they are all free to develop their party and grow their party. Not at the cost of your ally, whom you need the most in Tamil Nadu. It is BJP who needs AIADMK, not vice versa. And many occasions, we were branded as slaves. We were called as Sanghis whenever we come out in open in support of the ally. But you cannot backstab your own ally at the cost of your growth.
So let me ask Mr. Rajagopalan this. I mean, when you, this is what the AIADMK is claiming, their alliance partner and the leader of that alliance in the state abuses, you can't abuse Annadurai of a party that's called Anna DMK and expect the alliance to continue.
Zaka, there are certain misgivings between ADMK and BJP. My understanding is after they snapped the ties, now it's a developing story. My understanding are two things. One, BJP is making some efforts. Backroom talks are on now. That is what I heard from a top source in the BJP and also from ADMK. So therefore, second is, if ADMK walks out of BJP alliance, so therefore ADMK has also opened the door for DMK allies, because DMK allies are accusing ADMK for having tied up with BJP. Since the connection has been severed, now even Congress may peep in that door.
No, so of the DMK allies, who do you think could potentially jump ship, either to the NDA or to the AIADMK?
Smaller parties like CPI, CPM, Congress may not take that decision, because it is MK Stalin who projected Rahul Gandhi, the only one regional party in India in 2019 who projected Rahul Gandhi. Therefore, Rahul Gandhi and Mr. MK Stalin alliance and friendship are so closer. And if the pressure is mounting on CPI, CPM, even that VCK, if they jump towards ADMK, therefore the all India level, the India alliance will also suffer a setback.
So let me ask Sumant Raman. So the BJP, the silver lining for the BJP is they're saying that, look, for so many years in Tamil Nadu, we have existed under the shadows of the AIADMK, and now is a real chance for the BJP to come on its own, to stand on its own, create its own vote bank, create its own, political space in that state. They are a 5 or 6% vote share party. When they are fighting on their own, against both the Dravidian parties, DMK and ADMK, they may go from a 6% to a 10% vote share party. Do you buy that argument?
Zaka, the point is whether the BJP is satisfied being a 6% or even a 10% party. Now, that is something which I don't really think that the BJP, after seeing what's happened in states like West Bengal and a few other states, would be satisfied with. I mean, I don't see them being happy with 10%. So my point is, perhaps they have been a little too hasty in sort of the manner in which they treated the AIADMK, particularly their state president, and this has led to the rupture. By the way, Mr.
Is it true? Is it, because there's some confusion? Is it true that Annamalai actually said that I don't believe in Annadurai, and your ally's name is Anna DMK?
No. See, the basic point was he recited an alleged event of where Mr. Annadurai had apologized to Muthuramalinga Thevar and sort of left Madurai. But that he said, he quoted an article from the Hindu, and the Hindu then published a report saying that there was no such apology. Though there was an incident where there was a difference of opinion between the two of them. There was no. And then, of course, before that, he called Jayalalitha one of the most corrupt leaders or something like that.
Yeah.
So I think that all of this is not conducive to an alliance. And let me tell you this, Zaka, I do not at this point of time see any of these back channel talks making a change on the AIADMK, for the simple reason, if they go back to the BJP before the 24 elections, they are politically doomed.
Yeah.
Already the people of Tamil Nadu see them as a slave of the BJP, as Kovai Satyan himself said it. And now if they are going to, after having made this announcement and categorically said the alliance is off, if after a month they go back to the BJP, I think they are writing their own political.
No, I tend to agree with that assessment. I mean, 6 months before an election, an important Lok Sabha election, and the public manner in which the ADMK parted ways with the NDA. I mean, there were firecrackers that were burnt at the ADMK headquarters yesterday. For them then to backtrack and go back to NDA, I'm not sure how the public would be able to.
And Zaka,
no, one second. So I want to play out the vote share so far as it existed. And we're going all the way back from the 1998 Lok Sabha elections. Remember, they had allied at that time when Jayalalitha was around. The ADMK had won 18 out of the 22 seats it contested back then. The BJP had won 3 out of 5. ADMK had a 25% vote share, almost 26% vote share, and BJP had a 7% vote share. This was a 1998 election. In 2019, when the BJP swept across India, got 303 seats, it did not get much it did not get a single MP in Tamil Nadu. The DMK alliance swept, but the ADMK won 1 out of the 20 seats it contested. The BJP won none out of the 5. The BJP's vote share was 3.5%, and the ADMK's vote share was under 20%. Now, of course, this was a wave election where the DMK alliance swept. But if you were to compare again the 2004 Lok Sabha polls and the 2014 Lok Sabha polls, again 2004 Lok Sabha polls, the UPA at that time had swept. The BJP did not win a single seat out of the 6 it contested. The ADMK did not win a single seat out of the 33 it contested. In fact, the DMK alliance swept all 39 in that 2004 election. 5% vote share for BJP, 29% vote share for the AIADMK. Remember, this was when Jayalalitha was still around. In 2014, they fought separately. The ADMK alliance won 37 out of 39. The BJP won 1 out of 8. 5.5% vote share for the BJP and 44, almost 45% vote share for the AIADMK. I think the point here, let me ask this to Mr. Rajagopalan, is that the BJP has not broken the threshold of 7 or 8%. It's not gone into double-digit vote share in Tamil Nadu elections, either Lok Sabha or Assembly for that matter. The ADMK has only in one election come below 20%. Otherwise, its vote share has always been above 20%. How and why do you think that will dramatically change when these two parties contest separately in the Lok Sabha election of 2024?
Jacob, when you quoted these 3 elections, at that time, the ADMK did not split into 3 parts. Now, having gone 3, splinter groups, I am afraid the same 24% or 19% Mr. Edappadi Palaniswami may attract. Apart from that, that is the main reason why the minority votes are to be counted by the ADMK. That is why they are wooing the minorities. Now the minority votes will be split. I don't know whether Sumant Raman will accept with me or not. ADMK's minority concentration is less, but DMK, MK Stalin penetration into the minority votes are stronger. So therefore, my understanding is ADMK has taken a calculated risk. Whether it is going to pay dividends for them in 2024 or will they come back to the original position, we have to wait and watch. Apart from that, the minority votes are more crucial. That is why Congress will try to stick with DMK while other smaller parties like CPM, CPI and VCK, because DMK is having anti-incumbency within 22.5 years' time. Sumant Raman and Kovai Satyan may agree with me. The ground swell for Mr. Edappadi Palaniswami with BJP was stronger because ADMK was encashing the DMK's anti-incumbency. Now with the splinter groups, we have to wait and watch.
So Kovai Satyan, have you done this with an eye on minority votes? That's what Mr. Rajagopalan is saying.
Zaka, let me share the screen for you. I think somebody has to come out of their hibernation. It is not splinter groups anymore. It is EPS all the way, and yes, single leadership is back on track. The 2021 data, like how you can see in your screen, I'm showing it to you, it's from the Election Commission records.
Okay.
AIADMK stands at 33.3% of vote share. It is nowhere at 18% or 20% like the performance of 2019. And Bhartiya Janata Party is at 2.62%, not even 6, 7 or 10. Nothing of that sort is there.
No, but this is an assembly election, Kovai Satyan. This is not a parliamentary election.
Yeah, 2021, the latest assembly election result. Is
you can't compare assembly and parliament. But anyway, go ahead. Make the point that you're making. Yeah.
Assembly is where your larger vote share will come into picture. You certainly can't. But if you have to find inroads, that will be resultant in the assembly election polls, not anywhere else.
No, fair enough. But BJP's claim is that you were in alliance with ADMK. They were in alliance with ADMK in 2021. You were the larger partner at that time. You contested more number of seats. They contested fewer seats, and therefore, and this has been continuing for the last 20 years. You know, if they have to stand on their own and their vote share has to go from 4 or 5% to 10 or 15%, they have to fight on their own.
For that matter, two deals simple. Jaka?
One second. Let Satyan finish. Yeah.
20 seats is not a lesser number for BJP. So let's understand the might of AIADMK is different. In the political arena, in the political climate of Tamil Nadu, AIADMK calls the shots. In the political school of Tamil Nadu, BJP has just joined the pre-KG. You cannot challenge your master in the school who is for AIADMK.
Mr. Rajagopalan, quick, I think intervention you want to make, and I'll give Sumant the final word after that.
You are still in your dreams. No more splinter groups.
You were saying something about the symbol,
What compelled Mr. Edappadi Palaniswami to take a drastic decision, because 4 years of his tenure was at the centre's mercy as a chief minister of Mr. Edappadi Palaniswamy, and to leave symbol. Many of the court cases, the centre supported with the legal team. My understanding is Edappadi Palaniswamy has also instructed the ADMK leaders not to speak against BJP. So therefore, he kept the room open.
Sumant, final word. So net, I mean, you're going to basically have a three-way contest. The anti-DMK vote gets split, and what many were saying 30 out of 39 could now end up becoming 39 out of 39.
I think the challenge, Zaka, is for Mr. Edappadi Palaniswamy to at least win 4 or 5 seats to demonstrate that, the AIADMK is not a spent force. For Mr. Annamalai, a half-decent showing is essential to save his chair and to be, in the fray until the 2026 assembly elections. So I think that this is a big challenge. Yes, the DMK Congress combined will be in pole position. They will almost certainly win the vast majority of seats. But for both the AIADMK and the BJP, 2024 Lok Sabha elections are going to be a crucial test. And for Mr. EPS, having taken this decision to break away and having shown some decisive leadership, he now has to go to the people and back it up with at least 5 or 6 seats in the Lok Sabha election.
All right, we'll leave it at that. It's going to be fascinating. It's one of the big states, like I said, 39 seats, and generally elections in Tamil Nadu, whether it's parliament or for the state assembly elections, they've tended to swing one way or the other in very heavy numbers, either for the DMK alliance or for the AIADMK alliance. Whether there will be a rupture in that, whether there will be a change in that, we'll have to wait and see. It's going to be fascinating, the politics of that state. That's a wrap. Thank you very much for tuning in. I'll catch you again tomorrow night, same time. Good night.
Presented by
and also firm and direct, and I think as far as we are concerned, I mean, we support India on that. Having said that, also, I mean, in my lifetime, now I'm 60 years old, 40 years of my life we have spent facing various forms of terrorism in Sri Lanka. I have lost many friends, colleagues to terrorism. We have all lost, I mean, many Sri Lankans have died to terrorism. So therefore, I mean, our position on these matters, I think, is very clear, because we have endured and we have suffered. And as a country that has gone through that, I mean, tolerance for terrorism is zero tolerance.
Look, we care about both countries and we care about their relationship. Our relationship is rock solid with both of them. And I think that all of us need to make sure that we can come together as countries that take seriously sovereignty, take seriously security, and take seriously the potential of our relationship. But as you see here demonstrated, US and India are definitely stronger together. Thank you.
ये लोग सिख नहीं हैं जो किसी को थ्रेट करते हैं हिंदू को. ये केवल और केवल इनका मकसद तो जहर फैलाना और नफरत की खाई को बढ़ाना है, ताकि उसको देख या में थ्रेट करे सिख को या कोई और करे तो उसको इशू बना सकें. वो तो फ्लेयर अप करने के लिए ऐसी बातें कर रहे हैं, वरना कोई भी सिख जो है, मैंने आगे जैसे कहा, ऐसा काम नहीं करता. ये जो थ्रेटन कर रहे हैं, ये केवल और केवल आईएससी का एक रिटर्न एजेंडा था, कोई नया नहीं है. पंजाब में भी उन्होंने ये किया था, गऊ की पूंछ काट कर मंदिरों में फेंक जानी, सुअर को काट कर मस्जिदों में फेंक जाना, ये काम पहले भी किया गया था. ये एजेंसीज के जो फंडेड लोग होते हैं, ये ऐसी मानसिकता वही रख सकते हैं. एक सिख जो है वो कभी भी ऐसी मानसिकता नहीं रखता.
Well, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has raised the level of tension between India and Canada to an unacceptable level, and Justin Trudeau has made them in public. It is good of the Defence Minister of Canada to point out to his own Prime Minister that relations with India go beyond the issue of terrorism, which is important, and other issues, other difficulties and differences that we have. Canada should review its policy of allowing foreign terrorists and separatists to use Canada as a base and carry out activities prejudicial to the interests of countries that the Defence Minister of Canada regards as a friend of Canada, having shared strategic interests.
All right, it's time right now for a short break. On the other side, in just a few minutes, more of the country's top stories. This is CNN News 18. We'll see you in just a bit. To take you now to India and Canada, the unfortunate continuing worsening of relations between the two countries over the last few days. Remember, this entire story started with the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau making a statement in the House of Commons in which he said that the killing of the Khalistani separatist Hardeep Singh Nijjar was linked to Indian agencies. He also said that he had proof to make that statement. You'll remember that India's External Affairs Ministry had responded by asking for that proof. Since this set of exchanges last week, the relations between the two countries have continued to decline. Yesterday, we saw protests taking place in multiple cities, in Vancouver, in Toronto, and of course, we're also learning that the attendance in those protests was small. Now, Reuters and a number of other wire reports are suggesting that attendance in each of these protests was less than 100 people. We'll connect with a reporter on the ground to understand the implications. We are learning, however, that an Indian tricolour was burnt by protesters. Cardboard cutouts of the Prime Minister were also defaced. However, experts are pointing to the fact that because the Sikh population in Canada is about 770,000 people, this attendance is actually quite small. Now, we'll bring you more context on this and the developments. We'll also bring you more context on the National Investigative Agency and their continuing investigation into this entire story. First, some reactions. Take a look.
I'm very much aware of our Prime Minister's statement that he's made in the House of Commons and requesting cooperation from the Indian government in an independent investigation that's ongoing. But that's not the reason that I'm here. I'm certainly here to look for partnerships within the region amongst the 30 nations that are participating in this conference and looking for areas where the Canadian Army can contribute to Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy so that we can build peace and security much more with other countries within this region. And we'll do that through opportunities with like-minded nations for low-level exercises, multinational forums of discussion, capacity building, and exchanges of officers and soldiers on exercises.
So going forward with the same thought, we have a number of exercises, a number of cooperation between these two countries as far as military relations are concerned. Are we going to see any sort of impact of the current condition on those exercises and the cooperations?
No. There will not be any impact moving forward at this point in time. I certainly had a discussion with your Chief of the Army last evening, and we're both of the same opinion that the current issue is a political issue to be dealt with at much higher levels between our two countries. And certainly between the Indian Army and the Canadian Army, we will continue to look for opportunities to exchange ideas, train together where opportunities exist, and you know, contribute to peace and stability in this region. And that's really the fundamental reason for this conference. And we're very gracious for India to be hosting it.
Okay.
Hello, Namaskar. This is First Post and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma.